Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Horror Mine, the home for all things horror! My name is Vikshai, and this week, my friends, I'll be breaking down and discussing a film that is very close to my heart. That film is the psychological thriller Shutter Island, directed by the legendary Martin Scorsese. The film stars Leonardo DiCaprio and Mark Ruffalo as two U.S. Marshals looking for a runaway patient at a mental institute for the criminally insane. During the course of the investigation, Teddy Daniels is haunted by flashbacks and is forced to confront the demons of his past. While not a horror film in the traditional sense, the film offers a very creepy atmosphere and a true sense of dread felt throughout, and I absolutely love it. Shutter Island came out back in 2010 and has been one of my all-time favorite films ever since. This beautiful movie is fueled by an amazing performance from Leonardo DiCaprio, and has a plot that is truly mind-boggling and leads to an amazing twist that I never saw coming. I am very excited to be talking about this film with you all, and I hope you all enjoy the video. Without further ado, turn off the lights, and let's talk horror movies! Our movie begins on a really shabby looking boat in the middle of the sea. First time, huh? We meet our two main characters, U.S. Marshals Teddy Daniels and Chuck All, portrayed by Leonardo DiCaprio and Mark Ruffalo, who are two of some of my favorite actors. We discover that this will be their first time working together, and while introducing themselves, Teddy tells Chuck that his wife died in an apartment fire while he was at work. We are then treated to a very ominous shot of Shutter Island itself. Teddy and Chuck arrive on the island and are greeted by Deputy Warden McPherson, who welcomes them to Ashcliff, a mental institute for the criminally insane. All the guards appear to be extremely on edge as we see them glaring down at Teddy and Chuck. Deputy McPherson advises the marshals that they are not permitted to carry firearms on the property. After a slight protest, Teddy and Chuck hand over their firearms. As they walk towards the main building, Teddy is greeted by some of the patients doing yard work, and we see one of the creepiest old ladies I have ever seen. They are then introduced to Dr. John Colley, the head psychiatrist at Ashcliff, played by Sir Ben Kingsley. We find out that the marshals are there to investigate the disappearance of a patient named Rachel Solando. Dr. Colley says that Rachel murdered her 3 children by drowning them in the lake behind her house. He says that Rachel believes her children are still alive and has created a false sense of reality in which she never killed her children. How she escaped is a mystery to everyone, as her room was locked from the outside and the only window was completely barred. While investigating her room, Teddy notices a note hidden underneath a floor tile that reads, "The Law of 4, who is 67?" Teddy then requests access to the personnel files of all the employees at Ashcliff, which Dr. Colley denies. The marshals then join the corrections officers who are outside, enthusiastically searching for Rachel. Teddy asks if it could be possible for Rachel to be hiding among several caves in the distance, but Deputy McPherson tells them that there is no way Rachel could have made it by climbing down the cliff. Teddy begins to question all the orderlies about what happened the night of Rachel's disappearance. He requests to speak to Dr. Sheehan, Rachel's primary psychiatrist, but is advised that Dr. Sheehan left for vacation that very morning. Teddy and Chuck join Dr. Colley at his mansion for some alcohol. They are introduced to Dr. Naring, a German doctor and colleague of Colley. We then see a flashback of what appears to be Teddy as a soldier during World War II. We see a German officer laying in a pool of his own blood with a gunshot wound to his face. He attempts to grab a nearby firearm, but Teddy stops him. Teddy then watches as the German officer slowly dies from his wound. Teddy and Chuck are given beds in the orderlies' quarters, and that night, Teddy has a dream about his dead wife. In the dream, his wife tells him that Rachel never left the island. She also tells him that Ladis is here and that he cannot leave. Everything about this dream sequence was extremely beautiful to me and is one of my favorite parts in the entire film. Teddy wakes up and we see that the storm has gotten a lot worse. They have a conversation with Dr. Colley where he tells them he believes in treating patients with respect and attempt to understand them. Teddy and Chuck begin interviewing Rachel's fellow patients to ask them about her behavior. One of the patients, named Mrs. Kearns, murdered her husband with an axe. Teddy begins to ask her about Dr. Sheehan, which makes Mrs. Kearns really nervous for some reason. She asks Chuck to grab her a glass of water, and when he leaves, quickly writes something onto Teddy's notepad. Teddy then asks her if she's ever met a patient named Andrew Latis.
No.
Chuck asks Teddy about Andrew Latis, and he reveals that he was the man who lit the match that caused the apartment fire that killed his wife. Latis was then sent to Ashcliff but mysteriously disappeared, and with no trace or evidence of him ever being a patient there. Teddy believes that Latis may be housed in Ward C, where the most dangerous patients are kept. Teddy states that he specifically chose Rachel's case to find Latis. As the storm worsens, Teddy and Chuck hide out in an old mausoleum. Teddy tells Chuck about his time during the war when he liberated the Dachau concentration camp. He reveals that he and his fellow soldiers lined up the surrendering Germans and executed them all. He also tells Chuck that he believes there are evil human experiments being performed on patients at Ashcliff. He tells Chuck of a former patient named George Noyes who told Teddy about the experiments going on there. Teddy and Chuck go to confront Dr. Colley to ask him if there's a 67th patient there at Ashcliff. Dr. Colley tells them that there are only 66 patients, and also reveals that Rachel Solando has been found. They go talk to Rachel and attempt to find out where she's been all this time. We then see Teddy and Rachel share an oddly emotional moment together. Back in Dr. Colley's office, we see Teddy possibly experiencing a very bad migraine and is given some pills by Dr. Colley to help with the pain. Teddy and Chuck head down to the basement, which is serving as a shelter for the storm. Teddy notices the warden staring at him from afar and does not seem impressed by his presence. That night, Teddy has an extremely creepy nightmare of a dead little girl at Dachau. The dead little girl rises and tells Teddy, "You could have saved me. You could have saved us all." He then sees Andrew Latis sporting a gnarly scar across his face, just as Teddy described. We then see a bloodied Rachel Solando surrounded by her 3 dead children lying on the ground in a pool of blood. Teddy picks up the dead little girl who opens her eyes and asks him again, "Why didn't you save me?" Teddy tells her that he tried but that he couldn't get there in time and that he's sorry. They suddenly appear at a lake and Teddy drops the little girl into the water. This was a very disturbing and sad scene, as we could see that Teddy's emotional attachment to this case is starting to wear on him. Teddy wakes up to havoc at Ashcliff as all the orderlies are scrambling to get the patients back in their wards. The storm caused the power and backup generators to go out, allowing all the inmates, patients, to roam free from confinement. Chuck suggests that this is the perfect time to head to Ward C and look for Andrew Latis. A patient suddenly pops out of nowhere and baits Teddy into chasing him. He chases the patient deep into Ward C but is suddenly jumped by him from behind. Teddy manages to get the patient off of him and then starts to beat the ever-living shit out of him. He begins to choke the patient but is stopped by Chuck and a guard. Chuck and the guard take the patient to the infirmary, leaving Teddy alone again. He then meets with George Noyes, who is once again stuck at Ashcliff. George tells Teddy that he is stuck in here because of him. He tells Teddy that this is all a game and that he isn't investigating anything. He warns Teddy not to trust Chuck and brings up the fact that they have never worked together before. Teddy then gets another vision of Dolores, and George tells Teddy that he has to let her go, but he says that he can't. George tells Teddy that Latis is not in Ward C and is possibly inside of the lighthouse. Teddy links back up with Chuck, where Chuck reveals he found Andrew Latis' intake form. Teddy now seems suspicious of Chuck and says that he will take a look at it later. Teddy tells Chuck that he's going to head to the lighthouse alone. He climbs down the rocks but sees that the tide is up and cannot reach the lighthouse. He climbs back up to see that Chuck is no longer there. He notices a lit cigarette on the edge of the cliff and looks over. He then makes his way to the bottom of the cliff, but Chuck's body is nowhere to be found. We then see dozens of rats begin to crawl out of a small hole. Teddy then notices a small cave that appears to be lit from the inside. He bravely climbs up the rat-infested rocks, something I would never be able to do. In the cave, he meets with the real Rachel Solando. Rachel tells Teddy that she never had any children and that she used to be a doctor at Ashcliff. She says that she began asking questions about the large shipments of psychotropic drugs and the experiments that were going on, specifically the transorbital lobotomy. She compares the experiments being performed on the patients to those that were performed on the Jews by the Nazis. She even tells him that they have been drugging his food, coffee, and even cigarettes, and that everyone knows about what's going on. Before he leaves, he asks Rachel if she's seen his friend Chuck. Teddy then manages to catch a ride back to Ashcliff from the warden, and they have a really awkward conversation. Teddy has a talk with Dr. Colley and asks him if he's seen Chuck.
You don't have a partner, Marshall. You came here alone.
On my first viewing at this point in the movie, I was like, what the hell is going on? Where the hell's Chuck, man? Teddy makes his way to the basement and quietly grabs his tie. He runs into Dr. Naring and notices that he is reaching for a syringe in his pocket. He quickly grabs a hold of the sedative and injects the doctor with it. Teddy makes his way outside and breaks into Dr. Colley'S car. He is visited once again by Dolores, who tells him he needs to get to the ferry. Teddy believes that Chuck is being held hostage at the lighthouse and has to go rescue him. He sticks the tie given to him by his wife into the gas hole and lights it on fire. Teddy makes his way over to the lighthouse and we get a hilarious shot of him diving into the water. He sneaks up on a guard and takes his rifle before knocking him out. Teddy makes it to the top of the lighthouse and kicks his way in. We see Dr. Colley calmly sitting behind a desk and tells Teddy that his rifle is empty. Teddy then tells Dr. Colley that he spoke to Rachel Solando and that he knows what's taking place on Shutter Island. In the movie's crazy plot twist reveal, Dr. Colley responds that Dr. Solando is just another one of his hallucinations and that Teddy is in fact the 67th patient at Ashcliff. He reveals that Teddy is actually Andrew Latis, and that he has been a patient at Ashcliff for the past 2 years. He reveals that Teddy killed his wife because she murdered their 3 children by drowning them in the lake behind their house. He shows Teddy that Edward Daniels and Andrew Latis, as well as Rachel Solando and Dolores Chanel, are anagrams for each other and all have the same letters, and that this is the meaning of the Rule of 4. He tells Teddy that he's created a false sense of reality where he is not a murderer, but still a hero, a US Marshal trying to solve a case and uncover an evil conspiracy. Chuck then walks into the room and reveals that he is actually Dr. Lester Sheehan and is Andrew's primary psychiatrist. It is revealed that the missing Rachel Solando case has been a huge and elaborate roleplay put on by Dr. Colley and the staff, in an attempt to help Andrew come to terms with what he's done. He tells Andrew that if this experiment is a failure, then Andrew will be lobotomized. Andrew becomes aggressive due to the revelation and manages to grab his firearm off the table. He attempts to shoot Dr. Colley but finds out that his gun isn't a real one. He physically attacks Dr. Sheehan but stops when he is confronted with pictures of his 3 dead children by Dr. Colley. We then see the flashback that reveal the events that led to Andrew murdering his wife and being admitted to Ashcliff. We see that Andrew was in fact a US Marshal. After the apartment fire caused by his wife's suicide attempt, the couple and their 3 children retreated to a house by a lake. Andrew comes home to find that Dolores has drowned all 3 of their children. She asks him to set her free, and he fatally shoots her. Leonardo DiCaprio gives such a raw and powerful performance throughout the entire film, but especially during this scene. I truly felt for his character, as what he went through is something that no one should have to experience. I feel like this is something that would cause anyone, no matter how strong, to completely shatter. Andrew wakes up from the flashback and is now in bed wearing patient's clothing. We see that the person portraying Rachel Solando was actually a nurse. He is questioned once more by Dr. Colley, and we see that he has now come to terms with reality. Andrew says that he made up the false reality because he couldn't live with the fact knowing that his wife murdered their children. He feels that because he didn't get Dolores the mental help she needed, that he was responsible for their deaths. He finally tells them that his name is Andrew Latis, and that he murdered his wife in the spring of '52. In the film's final scene, we see Andrew and Dr. Sheehan sitting in front of the steps of the main building. Andrew once again calls Dr. Sheehan Chuck and says that they have to find a way off the island. Dr. Colley, visibly disappointed, says something to Dr. Naring, and the warden motions for the orderlies. We see several orderlies start to approach Andrew, one of them seemingly holding surgical tools. Andrew looks to Chuck and in the film's final line, asks Chuck if it would be worse to live as a monster or to die as a good man. Andrew stands up, seemingly at peace, and walks off with the doctors and the orderlies. The film's final shot is that of the lighthouse, which implies that Andrew was lobotomized as the film ends. And that, my friends, was Shutter Island. Ladies and gentlemen, this film left me completely speechless upon my first viewing. I literally did not know what to make or think of what I just saw. I never saw that plot twist coming, and at first, I couldn't believe it. I really thought that somehow Dr. Colley and Dr. Naring successfully managed to make Teddy think that he was crazy. I truly believed that Dr. Colley was evil and that Teddy had lost. However, upon a second and third viewing, there were many subtle clues throughout the film that helped the twist ending make that much more sense. I'll briefly be going over the clues I saw that support the ending, but keep in mind, while some of these are obvious, some of these will be my opinions and interpretations of what I saw and believe. In the film's opening scene, we see that Andrew doesn't have any cigarettes in his coat and is given a cigarette by Dr. Sheehan, showing that Andrew, a patient of Ashcliff, didn't have access to cigarettes like Dr. Sheehan did. When asked about which office Chuck is from, he replies Seattle, and that he's been with the Marshals for 4 years, which seems to confuse Andrew. There's not much context given here and it's quickly swept under the rug, but this leads me to believe that at the time, being 1954, there may have only been a handful of office locations for the Marshals, and Seattle was not one of them, something that Dr. Sheehan wouldn't have known without proper research. This scene is then called back to towards the end of the movie, and helps Andrew determine that he cannot trust Chuck. Upon arrival to the island, the guards, who are aware of the experiment, are visibly worried and on edge because Andrew is allowed to roam free to do as he pleases during the duration of the experiment. While driving up to Ashcliff, Andrew points out that Ashcliff is surrounded by an electric fence and says that he's seen something like it before. Now, he may be referring to the concentration camp he liberated, but he may also be recalling the electrified fence from his time as a patient. When the Marshals are asked to surrender their firearms, Chuck seems to have a little bit of trouble taking his holster off, something that a US Marshal with 4 years of experience should be able to perform smoothly. This next one is probably a stretch, but I still thought I'd put it out there. Dr. Colley and Naring refused to give Andrew the personnel files of all the guards and orderlies, something that you'd think they would be willing to provide during a federal investigation. While looking for Rachel Solando, the guards on the rocks don't seem too enthusiastic about looking for a missing patient. As a matter of fact, they aren't looking at all. These next two I feel were brilliant visual storytelling. Both the nurse and Mrs. Kearns look directly and awkwardly at Chuck when they are questioned about Dr. Sheehan. Then, Chuck makes a remark about Dr. Sheehan's vacation that makes everyone burst out laughing. This really drives home the fact that everyone was in on it, and Dr. Sheehan couldn't help but to bust out an inside joke that everyone would understand, but Andrew. When Andrew is alone in Ward C, several of the inmates can be heard whispering "Latest" as he walks past. George Noyce even refers to him as Latest and even reveals the entire plot twist, saying that this is all a game involving Andrew and that he isn't investigating anything. He tells Andrew that he must let Dolores go or he will never get off this island, and he's right. Upon first viewing of the film, I always viewed Dr. Colley as an evil mastermind who was trying to play tricks with Teddy. However, subsequent viewings have made me realize that Dr. Colley is very passionate about his work and truly cares about his patients. This is clearly evident when we see his visible sadness and disappointment when Andrew reverts at the end of the film. Finally, Andrew's own last words to Dr. Sheehan proves that he is aware of what he's done, but is unable to come to terms with it. Andrew would rather be lobotomized and die as Teddy Daniels than to live on as Andrew Latest with the painful knowledge that he killed his wife, who drowned their 3 children. There aren't many clues or theories that I could think of to support that Dr. Colley and everyone on the island being evil and brainwashing Teddy into thinking he's crazy. The only 2 I can sort of really think of are when Teddy meets with Rachel Solando inside the cave. I don't know how Teddy could have visualized a whole person as Rachel Solando, but then again, Teddy was never a reliable narrator. And throughout the film, Andrew gives subtle hints that he believes Dr. Naring to be an evil Nazi scientist. Dr. Naring's past is never revealed, which neither proves nor disproves that theory. Ladies and gentlemen, I absolutely loved this movie. It was brilliantly acted by everyone involved, especially Leonardo DiCaprio, whose performance I feel is extremely underrated. The film had an eerie and dreadful atmosphere throughout, and yet managed to be beautiful at the same time. I highly recommend this film to any fan of the horror genre, especially those who love mind-boggling thrillers. Ladies and gentlemen, as always, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have a movie you'd like to see me break down, let me know in the comments down below. My friends, I cannot wait to see y'all right back here in the horror mine. Y'all stick around.